Mega Evolution. Mega Powerful. When holding a Mega Stone, select Pokemon have the power to Mega Evolve.
Power creep is almost as synonymous with a new generation as new Pokemon. It's that all-encompassing factor that significantly affects the viability of so many, and usually not for the better. Over and over again, the release of a new generation of games has seen Pokemon that used to be decent, Pokemon that used to be good, Pokemon that used to be great or even the very best get devoured by Power Creep's voracious, gaping maw. In the context of new generation changes, several titans of the past have failed to maintain their status as such over time, falling through the tiering system, often into near total obscurity. The Pokemon that have survived or thrived in the face of power creep are those that have defined the larger competitive image for so many years. Generation after generation, it's Heatran, Garchomp, and Rotom Wash, and Ferrothorn, and Landorus Therian that are ruling the roost. What is it about them that makes them so robust in the face of power creep, that ruthless destroyer of previous metagame rulers? And what is it about the less fortunate Pokemon which power creep has eviscerated so entirely? Today, we ask, what is power creep actually? And also be sure to power creep your meals because this video is sponsored by HelloFresh. HelloFresh is a food delivery service that sends you farm fresh produce and ingredients straight to your door. They've got 30 plus recipes in their weekly selection with 70 plus convenience items. And look, I spend a lot of time working on videos and not much else. I barely have time to cook for myself, let alone cook something delicious. But with HelloFresh, the ingredients just arrive at my doorstep, the recipes are available on their mobile app, and the cooking takes like 30 minutes or less. This beef tenderloin with a delicious sauce that I'm not even gonna try to pronounce was super easy to make and tasted amazing. And if you're a vegetarian, pescatarian, or vegan, they've got plenty of options for you too, like this one pot cauliflower and bean soup that was very, very filling. I had enough to feed myself for like 4 days and it tasted great. For this one, all I had to do was dump all the ingredients in one pot. So if you want amazing, easy to make dinners on your time, use my link or go to HelloFresh.com and use code POGFalseNOV70 for 70% off plus free shipping on your first box. Power creep has been around since Generation 2 came out. The host of additions and mechanics changes brought a significant change in the way the game was played. Now sure, some of these changes were direct nerfs, critical hit rates no longer being based on speed, and Hyper Beam no longer losing its recharge turn if it scored a KO utterly ruined Tauros. However, power creep generally refers not to Pokemon ruined by such direct nerfs. For example, the two-time Uber Aegislash had a much worse performance in Generation 8, but that wasn't because it was a victim of power creep. It had its stats neutered. Power creep is used to refer to the addition of new factors which eclipse previously existing Pokemon, despite these Pokemon not being nerfed. Thanks to Gen 2 maintaining Gen 1's maxed out EVs across the board, the effects of this power creep were not as seismic as the automatic one-hit KO machines that were added regularly later on. However, the changes were significant nonetheless. Several moves added were new ways to threaten the opponent: Spikes, Pursuit, Thief, Cross Chop, Curse. Furthermore, several previous moves, such as the elemental punches, increased in distribution. Some moves were nerfed, like Blizzard had its accuracy reduced from 90 to 70%, Fire Blast had its 30% burn rate reduced to 10%, but Thunder had its paralysis rate increased from 10 to 30%, and others like Self-Destruct and Explosion had their base power increased. The addition of held items was significant too, most directly Marowak's Thick Club. A common theme in Pokemon devoured by power creep is that when their initial set of traits wasn't robust enough to withstand a new wave of additions, they weren't given enough new traits, abilities, moves, and in more recent generations, stat buffs to keep up. In Gen 2, this was seen in the previously dominant Alakazam not being able to reliably deal with the dark types that had been added. However, the first instance of power creep recognizable in sensibilities attuned to more modern generations could be seen in the shift from Generation 2 to 3. In Gen 3, the limit of 508 total EVs came into effect. Pokemon no longer had their offenses, defenses, and speed all maxed out. They had to pick and choose what they would invest in. The addition of Natures also boosted these stats further than they had before. As such, everything was both hitting hard already and hitting Pokemon that were often less bulky. As a result, previous metagame staples failed to keep up. The most notable extreme example was Exeggutor, which had been one of the very best Pokemon in Gens 1 and 2. But now in this much stronger metagame where it had to choose its EVs, Eggy couldn't hack it, and it fell from OU entirely. No matter what it did, it would either be too frail or too slow to be effective. And it also didn't help that there was another amazing grass psychic type running around in Celebi, who had been uber in Gen 2. And this marks another feature of power creep. With stronger surroundings, previously busted Pokemon would no longer be broken, and thus these former Ubers would drop into OU, increasing the power level even more. The EV split wasn't the only thing that did in Exeggutor, as well as other GSC OU staples like Marowak, Machamp, Nidoking, and Rhydon. Generation 3 was a far more aggressive metagame than Gen 2 by virtue of many incredible offensive additions that had come with it. To go with the theme of bigger, more immediate damage, Choice Band made already scary physical attackers even scarier. Move pools on existing Pokemon were filled out. For example, Skarmory gained Spikes, while Aerodactyl and Heracross gained Rock Slide, with the latter also gaining Swords Dance and Brick Break. Brick Break was also a great example of Generation 3 adding more usable offensive moves, and it wasn't just direct attacks like It, Focus Punch, Overheat, and Dragon Claw either. The boosting options were much better now, with the absolutely incredible Calm Mind and Dragon Dance enhancing already great Pokemon like Suicune and Tyranitar. Gen 3 also piled on the powerful new Pokemon. 2 pseudo-legends in Salamence and Metagross, a new base 100 Pixie in Jirachi, and the defensive-offensive excellence of Swampert. The buffs to passive damage were absolutely huge as well, which meant the amount of damage being done as a whole was increasing, not just that of direct attacks. In fact, the increased power of passive damage effectively made direct attacks even stronger than they already were in many cases, and Pokemon that were more able to withstand passive damage became better walls in many cases. For example, Suicune takes Tyranitar's hits much better than Flygon, but Suicune is also affected by Spikes and Sandstorm, meaning Tyranitar effectively hits much harder. Indeed, Tyranitar's permanent Sandstorm was the single most affecting factor in Advance, but Spikes weren't far behind, as they too had been buffed. In GSC, one could only stack 1 layer of Spikes. In Gen 3, they could be stacked for up to 3 layers. Even Leech Seed had been buffed, while more passive damage was added in the form of Will-O-Wisp. And it wasn't even just moves that had increased the power level flying around. The abilities Gen 3 introduced were key as well. We've already mentioned Tyranitar's Sandstream, but there were several others that contributed to the huge offensive onslaught that made Gen 3 almost seem like a different game entirely, compared to the relatively similar Gens 1 and 2. Gengar's Levitate turned what had been a Pokemon weak to Spikes and Earthquake into a Pokemon immune to Spikes and Earthquake. Dugtrio's Arena Trap allowed it to forcibly remove half of the OU tier. Magneton's Magnapole was more specific, but its steel trapping capabilities were integral to the metagame as well, most notably against Skarmory, who often seemed immortal otherwise. Abilities could directly boost damage as well, whether it was running Guts to get a boost off of status or Swarm to power up its Megahorn at low HP. Heracross was a prime example of both. Low health boosting abilities were also seen in Swampert's Torrent boosted Hydro Pumps, making it surprisingly hard for a Pokemon often seen as a wall, while Charizard pulled off stupefying levels of strength once its Blaze had been activated, in conjunction with Sunny Day, and in another new addition of Gen 3 that boosted power, Pataya Berry, one of the many pinch berries. And so Gen 3's utterly enormous shift in power, which made Gen 2's look positively quaint in comparison, set the tone for power creep going forward. Gen 4's power creep wasn't quite the nigh incomprehensible shift in core gameplay that was the shift from Gen 2 to 3, but it certainly came close, and also came almost seemingly intent on making Gen 3's power levels seem puny by comparison, which it certainly succeeded in doing. The impact of Stealth Rock alone cannot be overstated in fundamentally reshaping a Pokemon's viability and how teams were built and battles were played. In fact, it's so immense we have a video dedicated to it. Stealth Rock was just the tip of the iceberg too, to say nothing of how it could be bolstered by another new Toxic Spikes, which had utterly ruinous potential. The new physical special split was enormous. Now Gengar and Gyarados could actually use Stab off of their dominating attacking stats. Tyranitar could use Pursuit off of its much higher attacking stat. The likes of Salamence could threaten you with Stab on both sides of the attacking spectrum. And speaking of Mence and its Stab, that brings up another piece of Gen 4's insane power creep. The attacking moves. Outrageous previously unimpressive 90 base power had been buffed to a brutal 120, while Draco Meteor came in at a stunning 140. And since only steel types resisted it, this made it much more threatening than Overheat, and also the newly added Leaf Storm, which it shared its power levels with. Fighting types whose stabs had already been previously marred by some sort of flaw were now blessed with close combat. There were new special fighting type moves too, in Focus Blast and Aura Sphere, which made Pokemon like Gengar and Raikou even more adept at blasting through steels and Tyranitar. Gen 4 is also where the attacking switch move was introduced. Previously, Baton Pass could be used for such a purpose, but it wasn't much of a threatening attack. With U-Turn, however, Pokemon with bug weaknesses were put in lose-lose positions. Stay in and get hit super effectively, or switch and get forced out again by Pokemon the opponent sends in specifically to face yours. U-Turn's impact along with its Gen 5 cousin Volt Switch has been so huge, we also have a video dedicated to it. In Pokemon Platinum and beyond, Scizor became the #1 used Pokemon in the tier. It had the strongest stab U-Turn in the game, and the instant switch nature of the move meant it paired perfectly with Choice Band. Scizor was also an excellent user of the newly physical pursuit. But why Platinum and not already in Diamond and Pearl though? Because in Platinum, Scizor gained an amazing stab priority attack, Bullet Punch. This marked another smaller but still relevant aspect of Gen 4 power creep, bringing about a slew of new super effective priority moves. In addition to Bullet Punch, there were also Ice Shard, Aqua Jet, and Sucker Punch. Scizor's Bullet Punch was particularly powerful because of another source of Gen 4 power creep, the Technician ability, which specifically powered up weaker moves, being those under 60 battle power. It wasn't the only such ability either, but Champ's No Guard allowed it to spam the brutal Dynamic Punch freely, while Breloom's Poison Heal easily self-activated through the newly added Toxic Orb, made it one of the most infuriating Pokemon in the game, with its longevity and status immunity bolstering its ferocious offensive potential, especially since it could use the physical special split and newly added Seed Bomb to attack with dangerous grass stab that had been lacking in its move pool in the previous generation. This was an example of the stuff that wasn't as outright devastating as something like Draco Meteor, but was still incredibly relevant. Another would be players' new option in trading in Rock Slide for the significantly increased power of Stone Edge, which made something like Choice Band Tyranitar even stronger. Speaking of Choice Band, it was no longer unique in the type of boost it provided its opponent. It received a special attacking counterpart in Choice Specs and a speed counterpart in Choice Scarf. While Specs was more direct in the incredible offensive threat it offered already strong Pokemon and moves, Scarf was unique in that it provided Pokemon more opportunities to fire off these attacks that were powerful to begin with, by allowing them to outspeed opposing pokes that otherwise threatened them. Consider how putting a Choice Scarf on Heatran completely flips its matchup against Lucario, for example. If you're not feeling like locking into a single move, that's fine too. At the cost of 10% recoil, Life Orb put an enormous 30% charge behind all Pokemon attacking moves. On the subject of Heatran and Lucario, they were two amazing examples of the last aspect of Gen 4's huge power creep, the new Pokemon themselves. In addition to these representative bastions of strength, Gen 4 also boasted the monstrous likes of the eventually banned Garchomp, as well as other defining monsters in Infernape and the Rotom appliances. The unforgiving strength of Gen 4's power creep left several Gen 3 staples in the dust. Forget using the likes of previously good pokes like Snorlax or Regice. Now everyone wondered, how could you possibly outdo Gen 4's power creep? Like this. Generation 5 answered enthusiastically. Many say Gen 5 never truly found its footing in the face of all the absurdities it brought with it. Now, it didn't really bring many unstoppable new attacking moves besides Hurricane, which was an immense pain, and the aforementioned Volt Switch, which really was absurd. What it brought was absurd new methods of powering up those insanely powerful attacks that already existed. Team Preview was a two-way street, but it was amazing for offense because it let you know right away just how threatening your offensive threats were, making them even easier to utilize. But the most obvious power creep besides Team Preview was, of course, the permanent rain and sun that had been added via Drizzle Politoed and Drought Ninetales. Swift Swim was banned early on, but Rain continued to dominate with the incredibly long list of boosts it provided, while Sun proved problematic as well, with both leading to several bans. The rules of boosting no more than +2 at a time had been broken too. The mind-boggling Quiver Dance and Shell Smash saw to that. And with the addition of gems, Pokemon had even more item flexibility for blasting their opponent apart. Above all else though, Generation 5's power creep really shone with the addition of one metagame smashing Pokemon after another. Everything was faster and stronger with the additions of beasts like Terrakion and the Genies, and the presence of such beasts prompted the unbanning of previous beasts like Latios and Garchomp, thereby further increasing the already wild power level. Even the incredibly slow Reuniclus was part of this immense power creep, given its fantastic typing, stats, move pool, and of course, the the Magic Guard ability, and sometimes it even took advantage of its low speed and the metagame's high speed with an incredibly dangerous Trick Room set. Black and White 2 managed to push Gen 5's power creep even further, releasing Genesect Keldeo, the Therian forms of the Genies, Kieran Black, and even abilities like Technician Umbrella and Sheer Force on Landorus Incarnate. The latter Pokemon had already been borderline broken with Sand Force in Black and White 1, but Sheer Force just shot it into the stratosphere. And speaking of sand-related abilities, another new one had also been the source of much controversy throughout the gen. Sand Rush Excadrill, an incredibly strong Pokemon that also outsped everything in the game. Abilities in general had bolstered several Pokemon to dangerous levels of offensive threat throughout Gen 5, most notably Speed Boost on Blaziken, which had sent it from UU in Gen 4 to Ubers in Gen 5, as well as Multi-Skill Dragonite, Magic Guard Alakazam, and Moxie Salamence. Much of the metagame was either using these busted Pokemon or using the Pokemon that handled these busted Pokemon, which wasn't a very long list. The restrictive, specific, overpowered nature of the tier left many Gen 4 staples in the dust. Forget the Suicune and Flygon that had previously characterized OU. It made them look like UU Pokemon, which is exactly what they became. Gen 5's power creep was so immense that it sent 4-time Uber Mew from Ubers all the way to UU. Generation 6's power creep is an interesting case. There are, of course, the many mega evolutions it brought with it, several of which, like Gengar, Kangaskhan, Lucario, Mawile, and Salamence, just brutalized everything effortlessly and were banned in singles. The megas left behind were quite threatening too. The monstrously busted Aegislash only exacerbated this until its ban, Greninja as well, and other additions like Hoopa Unbound and Volcanion were similarly unique in their brutality. Furthermore, the buff to knockoff was absolutely enormous, since it was a powerful Dark Stab and removed opposing Pokemon's items, while several of the new fairy types were incredibly difficult to withstand. There was even a new hazard, Sticky Web, which wreaked all sorts of havoc. Hidden abilities like Contrary on Superior were released, diversifying the number of threats running around. Previous Ubers like Manaphy, Tornadus Therian, and Thundurus were unbanned. However, though all of these were relevant, there were several factors that actually made Gen 6 a perplexing case in the power creep department. While Megas were being bolstered, several other aspects of the game got toned down. First, permanent weather was no more. Sand continued to have significant presence, but it wasn't as all-devouring as it had been in the previous 3 generations. Gems had been removed too, barring a weakened normal gem. Additionally, the base power of a ton of new moves had been weakened, most notably Draco Meteor, Leaf Storm, Hydro Pump, Fire Blast, Hurricane, Ice Beam, Thunderbolt, Hidden Power, and even Meteor Mash. This gave Gen 6 a unique feel. While sometimes the metagame could feel incredibly overpowered, other times it felt like many offensive Pokemon weren't hitting hard enough thanks to these nerfs. It was only a few pokes like Megas, Volcarona, and Manaphy that possessed a sufficiently high threat level. Of course, if one felt too safe against the offensive onslaught in Gen 6, they could quickly be reminded just how monstrous the Pokemon they were dealing with were. The metagame oscillated between dominance of all-out offense and hardcore stall, and overall, when the dust settled, Gen 6's power creep was on the more reasonable, manageable side, and thus wasn't as harsh in rendering previously solid OU Pokemon unviable. Well, except for Politoed and Ninetales, of course. Gen 7 was like Gen 6 if the general power level, not just that of a few Pokemon, was jacked all the way up. Z moves meant anything could be threatening on a game-changing level, and could do so with a degree of unpredictability that made them even more dangerous. Of course, even more predictable Z-move users were predictable because they were so powerful, they remained consistent even if you knew they were coming. Thus, the metagame often felt uncontainable, like it was on the verge of spilling over into chaos. It wasn't just Z-moves either. Several new Pokemon were also absolutely monstrous. Greninja was back and wasn't just a Protean monster. It also came bearing an utterly obscene new Ash form. Magearna was the perfect Pokemon. Kartana was ridiculously strong and fast. Tapu Lele was one of the most unwallable Pokemon around. Zygarde Complete was banned almost instantly, but base Zygarde equipped with the new move 1000 Arrows eventually was too much too. These Pokemon were all insane, and that was before the unpredictability and power of their Z moves. You think you're relatively safe against Ash Greninja with your Toxapex or Assault Vest Magearna? Then it turns out to be Protean Z-Dig and destroys you. Many of the Pokemon that have remained OU for the past several generations for their robust typing, stats, and move pool that made them perfectly equipped for OU play, unless the game changed at a fundamental level on par with shifts from Gens 2 to 3, like Heatran, Lando T, and Garchomp, were also among the best Z-move users, and so Gen 7 largely resembled Gen 6, but faster, stronger, and less forgiving. Gen 8 doesn't seem too power crept, does it? They removed Hidden Power, Pursuit, Megaform Z Crystals, all of which killed or at least severely neutered several Pokemon whose viability heavily hinged upon them. Now that's true, but then you remember that they introduced a generational gimmick, Dynamax, that was so ludicrous that it was banned from OU almost right away. The unique properties of Max moves would have completely shifted how we saw the Gen's power creep. Instead, Gen 8's power creep is a new kind. It is not defined by the monstrous strength of its threats, but instead how its threats never seem to die, and are thus nearly impossible to withstand. This is largely in part thanks to heavy-duty boots, which made what would have otherwise been a palatable new Pokemon in Libero Cinderace one of the most unbearable monsters to face. The incredible buff to teleport makes it incredibly easy for Pokemon like Cinderace, Weavile, and other new faces like both forms of Urshifu to hit the field. And they're gonna do so without getting worn down. Other switch moves like Flip Turn being added help in this regard as well. Boots' longevity also turns Weavile into one of the most threatening pokes in the game, more than it already was. Such a frail Pokemon is suddenly able to go entire battles without getting chipped, regardless of the hazards put in place that are usually meant to limit threats such as it and Volcarona. This longevity factor was even seen in how Urshifu and Kartana often don protective pads to prevent themselves from getting chipped by Rocky Helmet, Rough Skin, and Iron Barbs. It's not just about strength, but about how long you can last to use your strength. The lack of Mega Stones and Z Crystals, as well as the emphasis on boots, made knockoff even more devastating, again coming from Weavile. Gen 8 is somewhat similar to Gen 6 in that sometimes everything feels too strong, and at others it doesn't feel strong enough to break through defensive cores. It's leveraging longevity to get the big hitters in over and over until the opponent cracks, and it's also comparable to Gen 2 in this way. When we go back in time, we often look in amusement at these metagames with lower power levels than the more modern ones. But when we look chronologically, it almost seems difficult to comprehend all the insane, complicated new levels of strength that were thrown at battlers generation after generation. With Generation 9 and its Terastallizing coming up, who knows what we'll see next? Will it be Dynamax level broken? What will the new Pokemon bring? New abilities, moves, buffs, nerfs? It's impossible to predict, but in the chaos, some form of order will take place, though it certainly will take a lot of bans to get there. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about power creep in singles? Was there anything that we missed? Was there anything that you would like us to talk about? Whatever it is, let us know in the comments. Also, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.